The warm Texas evening hummed with life as Keanu Reeves stepped into the quiet refuge of a small Dallas restaurant. The dim glow of lanterns flickered against the wooden walls, and the rich scent of homemade dishes lingered in the air. It was the kind of place that whispered stories rather than shouted them. He had come here seeking solitude, a quiet meal away from the bustle of the world. But instead, he found something that would change him. A voice, soft yet strong, rose above the gentle clinking of cutlery and murmured conversations. A young girl stood near the piano, her fingers trembling slightly as she gripped the microphone. She couldn't have been more than 17, but her voice carried a depth of sorrow and hope that belonged to someone much older. It wasn't just a song. It was a plea, raw and unfiltered. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and like the video so you don't miss tomorrow's video. Keanu set his fork down. He was no stranger to pain, to loss, to the struggle of carrying burdens alone. And in that moment, he recognized something in her voice, something hauntingly familiar. The girl's name, he would soon learn, was Alice. And she wasn't just singing for herself. She was singing for someone she loved. The song ended, but the silence that followed was heavier than the melody itself. For a moment, no one moved. Then, the restaurant erupted into soft applause, polite, appreciative. But Keanu didn't clap. He just watched. Alice gave a small, nervous bow and stepped away from the microphone, her shoulders tense. She made her way to a corner table where an old coffee tin sat, worn and dented, with a handwritten sign taped to it, "For Grandpa Jordan's surgery." Keanu's gaze shifted from the tin to the girl, and something in him stirred. He had been in this kind of moment before, on the edge of someone's struggle, someone's fight to hold on to hope. He knew what it felt like to want to help but not know how. The waitress came by to refill his water. He gestured toward Alice. "She sings here often?" The woman sighed. "Every night this week. Trying to raise money for her grandpa's medical bills. He's a woodworker, been in this town forever. Stubborn as hell, though. Won't accept a dime he doesn't earn himself." Keanu nodded slowly. He understood pride like that. He understood not wanting to be a burden. But he also understood something else. Sometimes, no matter how strong you were, you couldn't do it alone. He watched Alice as she sat at the table, counting the few bills and loose change that had been dropped into the tin. She pressed her lips together, blinking rapidly, as if willing herself not to cry. Keanu leaned back in his chair, thinking. He didn't just want to help. He wanted to do it in a way that honored them, that didn't make them feel like charity. And then, an idea began to form. Keanu sat for a long time, watching Alice in quiet contemplation. He had given to charity before, anonymous donations, quiet gestures of kindness. But this was different. This wasn't just about money. This was about restoring something deeper, dignity, hope, belief. He stood, leaving a generous tip on the table, and walked toward the coffee tin. He pulled a few folded bills from his pocket but hesitated. Just dropping in money wouldn't change anything. He needed another way. Instead, he turned to the waitress. "Do you know where I can find her grandfather?" The woman blinked in surprise. "Jordan? He's got a small workshop on the edge of town. Makes furniture, repairs old houses. But you won't get far offering him money." Keanu smiled slightly. "Good. I'm not offering money. I'm offering a job." The waitress gave him a skeptical look but jotted down an address on the back of a napkin. He took it, slipping it into his jacket pocket. As he turned to leave, Alice caught his gaze. She was studying him, cautious but curious. "You like the song?" she asked, her voice quieter now, hesitant. Keanu nodded. "I did. It had heart." He paused. "Your grandpa. He must mean a lot to you." Alice's expression softened. "He raised me. He's all I have." Keanu understood that feeling all too well. "Then let's make sure he gets the help he needs." Alice frowned. "What do you mean?" Keanu only smiled. "You'll see." And with that, he stepped out into the Dallas night, a plan forming in his mind. The next morning, Keanu found himself outside a small, weathered workshop on the outskirts of Dallas. The building had seen better days, the paint was peeling, and the old wooden sign above the door was barely legible. But there was something about it, something sturdy, something that had lasted. The sound of hammering echoed from inside. Keanu stepped through the open door and saw an elderly man hunched over a workbench, carefully carving the edge of a wooden chair. His hands, though rough and calloused, moved with precision, as if every cut mattered. "Jordan," Keanu said. The old man didn't look up. "If you're here to sell something, I ain't buying." Keanu smiled. "Not selling. Looking for someone who knows how to bring things back to life." That made Jordan pause. He straightened slowly, turning to study Keanu with sharp, skeptical eyes. He was a man who had seen a lot, lived through more, and trusted little. And you are. Keanu extended a hand. Keanu. Jordan didn't take it. Instead, he wiped the sawdust from his hands onto his apron and crossed his arms. That's supposed to mean something to me? Keanu chuckled. Not really. He glanced around at the half-finished furniture, the carefully arranged tools, the stacks of reclaimed wood leaning against the wall. You do good work. Jordan grunted. Good work don't pay the bills. Keanu nodded. That's why I'm here. Jordan narrowed his eyes. If you're about to offer me money out of pity, you can turn right around and walk back out that door. Keanu held up his hands. No handouts. A job. There's an old building in town, been abandoned for years. I want to bring it back. Fix it up. I need someone who knows wood, someone who knows how to restore things instead of tearing them down. Jordan studied him for a long moment, as if searching for the catch. And why the hell do you care about some old building? Keanu leaned against the workbench. Because your granddaughter sings with more heart than I've heard in a long time. And I think she deserves a stage where people can really hear her. For the first time, Jordan's expression flickered, just for a second. A mix of surprise, maybe even pride. But he covered it quickly. You're crazy, he muttered, shaking his head. Keanu shrugged. Maybe. Then, after a pause, but is that a yes? Jordan exhaled slowly, rubbing his jaw. Finally, he extended his hand. If we're doing this, we do it right. No shortcuts. Keanu grinned as he shook Jordan's hand. Wouldn't have it any other way. The old building sat in the heart of Dallas, forgotten by time. Its windows were boarded up, its walls covered in peeling paint and graffiti. But beneath the years of neglect, Keanu saw what it could be. A place where music could thrive, where people like Alice could share their stories through song. Jordan stood beside him, arms crossed, eyes scanning the structure like a man sizing up a stubborn piece of wood. She's a damn mess, he muttered. Keanu grinned. So was my first motorcycle. Fixed her up. Best thing I ever did. Jordan let out a small chuckle before shaking his head. This is bigger than a bike, Hollywood. Keanu turned to him. So is what we're doing. They got to work the next morning. Jordan was relentless, measuring, cutting, hammering, restoring. His hands moved like they were born to build, to heal. Keanu didn't just stand back and watch, he was in the thick of it. Hauling wood, sanding beams, sweeping away the dust of the past. And Alice? She was there too. At first, she only came by after her shifts at the restaurant, bringing food and watching from a distance. But then, little by little, she started helping cleaning, painting, and even humming as she worked. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low, she finally spoke the words that had been lingering between them. Why are you doing this? Keanu wiped sweat from his brow. Because sometimes people just need a chance. Alice frowned. But why me? Keanu met her gaze. Because you're worth hearing. She looked away, blinking fast, as if fighting back tears. No one had ever said that to her before. Jordan, who had been hammering a beam into place, spoke without looking up. He's a stubborn one, kid. Might as well get used to it. Alice let out a soft laugh, and for the first time in a long time, she let herself believe. The building was coming back to life. And so were they. Days turned into weeks, and the once abandoned building began to change. The dust and decay gave way to polished wood and warm lighting. The cracked stage, once a forgotten platform, was now sturdy and waiting for a voice like Alice's. Keanu worked alongside Jordan every day, learning from the old craftsman, earning his respect with sweat and effort. He wasn't just a movie star throwing money at a problem. He was in the thick of it, just another pair of hands determined to bring something to life. Alice still had her doubts. What if no one comes? She asked one evening as she ran her fingers over the smooth, freshly sanded stage. Keanu, sitting on an overturned crate, smiled. They'll come. She shook her head. I'm not anybody. Jordan, wiping his hands on a rag, let out a snort. That's bull. Alice turned to him in surprise. People listen when you sing, girl, he said, his voice gruff but gentle. Not just because you sound good, but because you mean it. That's rare. Alice swallowed hard. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe Keanu. But fear had a way of digging its claws in deep. Keanu leaned forward. Alice, this isn't just about a concert. It's about you stepping onto this stage and owning the fact that you belong here, that your voice deserves to be heard. Alice hesitated, looking down at her hands. And if I fail? Keanu's voice was quiet but firm. Then you get back up. And you try again. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken things. Then, finally, Alice nodded. And just like that, The dream was set in motion. The concert would happen. The stage was waiting. And soon, Alice would have her moment to prove to herself and the world that she was more than just a girl singing for spare change. With the stage ready and the concert set, there was only one thing left to do: make sure people showed up. Alice wasn't sure how to do that. She wasn't famous. She didn't have followers or a name that carried weight. But Keanu? He knew how to get people's attention. "We'll start small," he said one morning, sitting on a stack of wooden planks outside the venue. Word of mouth. Flyers. A little social media. Alice chewed her lip. "I don't even have social media." Jordan, who was sanding the last of the wooden banisters, grunted. "Probably better off that way." Keanu chuckled. "I know some people. Let's just say, we'll make sure the right folks hear about it." What Alice didn't know was that Keanu Reeves spreading the word was no small thing. Within days, whispers of an intimate, one-night-only performance in Dallas began to float through local music circles. Some thought it was just another underground gig. Others, especially after Keanu's name was subtly linked to it, were intrigued. And then the buzz grew. A well-known local radio DJ caught wind of the event and mentioned it on air. A journalist who had covered indie music scenes in Austin posted about it, curious about who this mystery girl was. And when a small video of Alice singing at the restaurant surfaced, filmed weeks earlier by a customer and shared on a musician's blog, the response was undeniable. "This girl feels every word," one commenter wrote. "I don't even know her, but I already want her to win." The coffee tin that once barely held enough for bus fare was now filled with generous donations from strangers who believed in something they hadn't even heard in person yet. Alice was stunned. "This is crazy," she said one evening, staring at a flyer Keanu had designed, featuring nothing but a simple image of the newly restored stage and the words, "One night, one voice." Jordan smirked. "Not crazy, just long overdue." But even with all the buzz, one thing still lingered in Alice's mind. "People might come," she admitted quietly, "but what if I freeze? What if I can't do it?" Keanu leaned against the bar, arms crossed. "Then we remind you why you started in the first place." Alice looked at him, searching his face. "And why is that?" Keanu's expression was steady. "Because there's something inside you that needs to be heard." The day before the concert, the venue was alive with last-minute preparations. Lights were tested, sound equipment was fine-tuned, and chairs were arranged in neat rows. The once-abandoned space now looked like it had been waiting for this moment all along. Alice stood at the edge of the stage, staring out at the empty seats. It felt bigger now, more real. "You ready?" Keanu's voice came from behind her. She turned, arms crossed tightly. "What if I'm not?" Keanu stepped beside her, looking out at the stage as well. "That's normal. Big moments should scare you a little. Means they matter." Alice let out a shaky breath. I've never had people really listen before. What if they don't like what they hear?" Jordan, who had been adjusting a wooden panel near the side of the stage, let out a snort. "Then they don't know good music." Alice gave him a small smile. Keanu watched her carefully. "Alice, this isn't about whether they like you. It's about you realizing that you belong here, that your voice is worth something. And tomorrow night, you're going to prove that to yourself." Alice swallowed, staring down at the stage beneath her feet. "Come on," Keanu said, stepping back. "Let's do a sound check." Alice hesitated, but nodded. She walked to the center of the stage, adjusting the microphone with slightly trembling fingers. The old speakers hummed softly as the sound tech gave her a nod. Keanu took a seat in the front row, arms resting on his knees, watching. Alice closed her eyes, took a breath, and then as she sang, her voice was quiet at first, a little unsure. But then it grew, filling the empty space, reaching every corner of the venue. The rawness, the honesty, it was all still there. Keanu smiled. When the last note faded, Alice opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. "How was that?" Keanu stood, clapping slowly. "Sounds like someone who's ready." Alice bit her lip, trying to hold back the nervous grin threatening to break through. Maybe, just maybe she was. The night of the concert arrived, and the once empty venue now pulsed with life. People filled the seats, murmuring in anticipation. Some were there out of curiosity, drawn by the mysterious buzz surrounding the event. Others had heard Alice's voice through a viral clip and wanted to experience it for themselves. Backstage, Alice sat on a wooden stool, gripping the microphone with both hands. Her heart pounded so loudly she could hear it over the muffled voices beyond the curtain. Keanu crouched beside her. Deep breaths. She inhaled shakily. "What if I forget the words? What if my voice cracks? What if Keanu held up a hand, stopping her spiral. What if you don't? Alice blinked at him. What if, he continued, this is the moment everything changes? What if you step out there and do exactly what you were meant to do? She swallowed. And if I fail? Keanu smiled. Then you get back up. And you try again. Jordan appeared in the doorway, wiping his hands on his work apron. I'd tell you to break a leg, but I'm too damn old to be fixing more things. Alice let out a nervous laugh. Then, the lights dimmed. The murmurs in the crowd quieted. A single spotlight illuminated the center of the stage. Keanu squeezed her shoulder. It's time. Alice took a deep breath and stepped forward. The moment she walked onto the stage, a hush fell over the audience. She reached the microphone. The warmth of the light wrapped around her. For a moment, silence. Then, she closed her eyes, took one last deep breath. And she sang. Her voice started soft, hesitant. But then, like a wave gaining strength, it grew. It soared. It wasn't just a song, it was a story, woven from every moment of struggle, every tear, every ounce of love she had for her grandfather, and this dream she never thought she could chase. In the front row, Keanu watched with quiet pride. Jordan stood with his arms crossed, blinking a little too much for it to be casual. By the time Alice reached the final note, the room wasn't just listening. They were feeling a beat of silence. And then, thunderous applause. Alice let out a shaky breath, as wide as she took in the standing ovation. She had done it. The applause didn't die down, it only grew, waves of cheers rolling through the crowd. Alice stood on the stage, breathless, eyes wide with disbelief. For so long, she had only sung for survival. Tonight, she had sung for herself. Keanu clapped, a proud grin on his face, and beside him, Jordan wiped at his eyes, though he'd never admit it. Alice stepped back from the microphone, pressing a hand over her chest as if trying to steady the storm inside her. She had spent years thinking she was invisible, but tonight, people had seen her. They had heard her. As she walked off stage, Keanu was the first to meet her. Told you. Alice let out a breathless laugh. Told me what? That you belonged up there. She shook her head, still overwhelmed. I don't know what happens now. Jordan stepped in, his voice gruff but warm. What happens now is you keep going. A man in the audience, a local music producer, was already approaching, his hand extended. That was incredible. Have you ever thought about recording? Alice blinked. What? Keanu smirked. Looks like people are ready to listen. And just like that, a new path opened before her, one she had never dared to dream of. Alice turned to Keanu, her voice quieter now. You did this. Keanu shook his head. No, you did. She smiled, the fear that had once held her back now replaced with something else. Hope. That night wasn't just a concert. It was a beginning, and Alice was finally ready to step into the life she was meant to live.